say all that over?
I got it.
Okay, say all that over.
I got it.
You're good.
Well, welcome to our meeting today. We're glad you're here. Thanks for taking time out of your day to be here. Welcome guests and welcome members of the committee. We'd like to start with a roll call. And David, maybe we'll start with you and go around the table.
David Day, Provo City Public Works.
Gary Winterton.
Dave Decker.
Bill Holterstrom.
Dave Graves, Provo City Public Works.
Lee Sergensen.
Brian Maxfield, Provo City Community Development.
Shannon Ellsworth, private citizen.
Phil Rauch.
Terry Herbert, Lakewood Neighborhood Chair.
Beth Halliday, Southwest Area Chair.
LaDawn Christensen, landowner.
Okay, then you're on council. Do we need everyone in the room?
No, usually just the committee
Just the
members.
committee members? Okay.
Cliff Strachan, council staff.
Couple, just one little bit of business before we go on. Committee members, we'd like to approve minutes for the September 13th meeting, the September 21st meeting, September 27th meeting. Those should have been sent out, and if you had a chance to review those. Any corrections or any reason not to approve them that we need to drop something off? Or?
Move to approve.
Thank you. Is there a second? Thanks. And all in favor? Any opposed? All right, thank you. Yes, that motion passes, so the minutes are passed. As you've seen from the agenda, most of our meeting today is going to be have presentations, and so we'd like to start with agriculture. And there, Mr. Marcus Smith from the Ag Commission is going to introduce Sean Miller. So, Marcus, we'll
Just
turn
right
it over to
here,
you.
this too, right here.
Perfect.
My day job, I'm the general manager of BYU Radio and Classical 89 over at BYU Broadcasting. And a couple of weeks ago, Don Jarvis contacted me and wanted to see if I would volunteer to be involved in recruiting people to form an agricultural commission to advise the mayor's office through Don Jarvis. And so I'm a volunteer, and I've been in Provo since 1979. Parents native Utahns, and I've lived in 5 different places here in Provo. I currently live in the Rock Canyon neighborhood. I used to live in the Lakeview South neighborhood, just off the Provo River, west of Geneva Road. And then I've lived near the Provo Utilities Building, near Kiwanis Park. Homeowner twice, and I owned a home just near the Harbor Park neighborhood in one of the newer developments. And the reason I bring that up is because I want to just let you know where I'm coming from. Back in the 80s and 90s, I would walk from my neighborhood near Provo Utilities all the way down the Provo River Trail out to the Utah Lake State Park. And I was not a runner or a jogger, I just walk it, and I do that 3-4 times a week. And it's this long 5-mile loop, and I went through areas. There were established neighborhoods across on the south side of the river, past Geneva Road, an older neighborhood. The Harbor Park neighborhood was already there. But by and large, adjacent to the Provo River Trail, on the north side was still open and hadn't been developed yet. And over the course of many years, as I did that, I saw it start to fill in. And because I had leanings of coming from a farm family myself, I hurt to see that happen. And I swore to myself, I'll never do that. 20 years later, I bought a home right there. And I had a certain sense of a feeling of a little bit of hypocrisy, and it still hurt. And yet, at the time, because of the economics, I needed a home. I had a family, a young family, looking for my first home. And of all the 4 places we could afford in Provo, that's where we could live. And so for 9 years, I lived on a parcel of land that had been farmed. And the reason I tell you that story is because I want you to know that I am very conversant with the emotional as well as the economic tensions of what happens when farmland turns to something else. And that's part of the reason for my involvement on the Agricultural Commission. I care about these things. I think, having worked now for a couple of months with this brand new Agricultural Commission, that my experience is not unlike many members of the committee the commission that we've recruited. The people who are participating on this commission are real level-headed people who don't have radical views. They just understand the contingencies of trying to come up with public policies that will address adequately all of those different, all of the issues at play here. I want to just make an analogy, and I don't want to confuse the metaphor here, but the house that I lived in, that we bought over in the Lakeview South neighborhood, was built in 1998. The house I've moved to now in the Rock Canyon neighborhood was built in 78.
A very nice neighborhood, by the way.
If I were to compare those two builds, I think that the new house, the old house that I live in from 78, is going to outlive the new house I bought in Lakeview South by maybe 5 decades. It has to do with the quality of the build and the way it's been done, you know. And I'm not saying anything about whether that house will stand or whether it should stand or whether new houses like that should be built on the west side. All I'm saying is when that house was built, it was built with a short vision in terms of what its purpose would be, what the revenue would be for the builder, and with very little thought, in my humble view, very little thought for what would happen in 40 or 50 years. So when I encounter something like the Envision Utah, documentation, I feel really gratified to think that people somewhere, whether or not you agree with everything, and I don't necessarily agree with everything here, I love the judicious and providential approach to planning, where people take a long view and where adequate time is given to really weigh what's at stake. It makes me very sad to think that things can progress at a speed where due diligence doesn't take place. And so I would just let you know that as heading up this agricultural commission and working with these just citizens who are volunteering their time to think with you and whoever else in the community or in the state, whoever else is thinking through these issues, they're very level-headed, down-to-earth people who understand what's at stake for multiple parties and for varied interests in our community. Having said that, I just want to introduce Sean Miller now. Sean is a member of the committee. He was once my neighbor because he lives over on the west side in the Lakeview South neighborhood too, where I used to live. He's got a lot of background as a scholar who's studied what happens to agricultural areas over time as urbanization takes place. And he'll be able to better characterize what his specialization is. But I think the thing that's really nice about Sean's input is that it's not a provincial view. He has seen best and worst practices at play far afield from here with studies in Latin America and what has happened to green areas and agricultural lands in places like Brazil, elsewhere. I'll probably name the wrong countries, but his specialization is he's seen what's best practices, worst practices far away from this location. So Sean, go ahead.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to come and talk. Do you want me to stand anywhere in particular, I guess?
Sean, what is your last name?
Miller, M-I-L-L-E-R, the usual way. And I'm grateful for this opportunity. I'm not an expert on this, but I'm trying to become one. It's something that means a lot to me. I'm also a West Side resident. Also live in a place where farms used to be, and so we're all part of the problem to a certain extent. If you see here on the screen what Provo looked like in about 1920, how much open land there was. And we really were a farming community. Our pioneer ancestors built farms. Even the area you see there that's, I've got a pointer on this or not, is that the green? Yeah. Even the area you see with trees, that's largely farmland, even in the interior of Provo. And those of us that have lived here for a long time have just seen all that farmland incrementally disappear. And my argument is we ought to be saving some of that, not just in the county, but right here in Provo. So this is from the Envision survey. And on the left, it shows what kinds of crops we're growing in Utah County right now. You'll notice that there's quite a bit of feed crops there. The pink stuff is orchards and berries. I put the little circle right there. This is an orchard that just went poof, so the little pink you see there is now gone. And what they're predicting is by 2050, all that stuff you see in the salmon color is current farms that will no longer be farms if we continue with the current trends. And I think that's not the way we should be thinking about this long term. We got to be thinking about how we can save those farms, and I'll give you some of the reasons why I think so. The probability is that most, and importantly the best of, our irrigated farms and orchards will disappear by 2050 if we don't do something about it. And I think we need to do something about it as a city, and that we can't wait for others to take care of this problem, because nobody's really been doing much about it here in Utah up until this point. Here is the largest remaining orchard in Orem, and I show you this because we just assume that it's going to disappear. And I think that's the wrong assumption. We should assume that it's going to stay, and it's going to stay for a long time. And this is what it looks like on the ground. And this here is our current zoning map. And all the areas in green, of course, are agriculturally zoned currently. But if things keep going as they have, they will all turn into developed areas. And again, I think that's sort of the expectation, that we're just going to develop this. And I think it's the wrong one. This is our current general plan. And it shows in green areas that are currently designated as agricultural areas for the future. But there's no commitment to keeping those as agriculture for the long term. If you read what it says here, this designation is intended to protect agricultural uses from encroachment of other development until such time as residential, commercial, and industrial uses in such areas become necessary and desirable. It sounds inevitable to me, and I don't think it should be. Wrong buttons here. There are all kinds of things driving this. We're familiar with them. One is the age of farmers. The average age of farmers in the United States is 58. 20% of the land in the United States will change hands. 70% will change in the next 20 years. Those are opportunities, but they're also some significant liabilities. It will turn into something we don't want it to. So here's the area in question, and there's the new road. The other thing that drives this is roads. It's there. There's nothing we can do about it now. But we used to build roads to connect us from one place to another, and we still call these connectors. But the reason we build roads now is to access space. And we now have access, and we have some decisions to make. So here's what it looks like today. The for sale signs are already up. A lot of that property has already been for sale and is in the hands of non-farmers, which makes it more difficult. Here's some reasons we should preserve our farms and open spaces. And then I'll try and answer this question, do we want to? Number one, just to protect our landscapes. These are open spaces, they're beautiful, they serve aesthetic purposes, we enjoy them. They disappear and our quality of life goes down. Here is the Provo River Trail, the lower end of it here. This is the most popular part of the trail in the city of Provo because on both sides it's surrounded by farmlands. It's a beautiful place to walk through and enjoy. It's much better than walking over here where you're looking into my backyards and to Marcus's backyard. This is where we live, right in this area. This is a real asset for our community, but if we lose, we are not, I don't think we're thinking about this in the best ways we can. We also should preserve these spaces because they're historically important, right? Our ancestors built these spaces, they put in irrigated farmland all over the place. These are priceless resources that we cannot replace. We'll talk more about that. Habitat protection. This is a shot of the Despain easement. It's one of the few places that we've protected in Utah Valley. My kids and I walk out here all the time. We see deer, we see foxes, we see coyotes, we see birds of prey, we see sandhill cranes, you name it. This is a very diverse place, and that Skipper Bay Trail, one of the hot spots for birders in the state. You can see 100 species of birds in a couple hours walk on a good day. And the reason that it's so good is you have fields, forests, shrubs, beaches, and water. You just have all these different habitats. It also makes economic sense. We think development is a way to promote the economy and growth, but farms are also contributing fairly substantially. This Envision survey argues that farmland requires about 37 cents in public services to maintain per dollar, right, that they pay in taxes, whereas residential land requires $1.11 in services. And so they are drains on our communities in some ways rather than contributors. Local food. We have a great farmers market here in Provo, but how long will we have it? There'll be a time, whereas in other communities, farmers markets are only farmers markets in name because they have no farms any longer, and we're pushing that kind of boundary now. And then for me, maybe the most important one, and I think the one that resonates a lot with Utahns, is food security. Where does our food come from? What are we going to eat? We talk about well, we need to build houses so our children have a place to live, but I have to think, well, what are our children going to eat if we can't get our food from other places? I like this map because it shows the intensity of food production around the country. It shows what's being produced and how much is being produced. If you look at Utah, we don't produce very much. And the reason we don't is because we have a landscape that is not amenable to producing a lot of food, right? The other thing this map shows is we are in the middle of nowhere as far as food goes. We are the most isolated large population as far as food. And if we had some sort of emergency, we might be the last people anybody cares about. And I think for Mormons in particular, we have this strong sense of self-sufficiency that we want to maintain. And you cannot eat what you cannot produce. So this shows all the land that's under threat, farmland that's under threat in Utah. We used to be self-sufficient in food. Now we produce only 2% of our vegetables, only 3% of the fruit that we eat here, and only 25% of the dairy. Although we do pretty well in grains and in protein. We actually produce what we eat here, which is great. But I would think that wisdom would suggest that we not dig more foundations in our fertile, irrigated soils. Do we want to save our farms? The Envision Utah survey says that this is a very popular thing. 98% of Utahns think that we should search for more self-sufficiently. We should put more land in agriculture rather than taking land out of agriculture. And they don't want to build farms, and they listed a number of things they're willing to sacrifice. And here are their priorities for doing this: improve self-sufficiency in food, eat local food, maintain our open spaces, all these things that I've talked about. What have other communities done to protect the farms in their, we in Utah are quite a ways behind many other states around the country. And what's good about that is there are all kinds of great examples of what can be done to protect farmland. The most common way to do this is through easements. I don't know how much you know about easements. I'm probably talking to people here that know more about some of these topics than I do. But this is simply a way of permanently preserving farmland. The property remains in the hands of the farmers, but it will be farmed in perpetuity. And other states have taken this very seriously. And I'll show you some just quick examples here. The state of New Jersey, as of July of this year, they have preserved 2,438 farms. This is over the last 25 years or so. Total acreage, 23 million acres. That's 23 million acres of farmland that will never be developed because an easement has been placed on it, right? Farmers are still there, they're working the farm, they can sell that farm when they're done, when they retire, but they can only sell it to people who are going to farm the land. The total cost to the state of New Jersey is $1.7 billion. That's a priority for them. They're very proud of this. The rest of it, 64% of those costs are covered by the state, the rest is covered by local communities. If you go to this document here, 98 pages of every farm that they preserved, the acreage and how much it costs to do that, and that list grows and they update it every 6 months. So look at Utah by comparison. We have currently 331 conservation easements, and most of those are for wildlife habitat, they're not for farms, okay? The best research I can find is we have 12 farms and 7 ranches in the state of Utah, 11,000 acres that have been preserved, and that's based on this National Conservation Easement Database. We need to do a lot more. So here's what it looks like on the ground in New Jersey. Everything you see in dark color is an easement. Preserved farmland in perpetuity. If you get a little closer, this is what it looks like. So everything in brown and red is easement land. The green stuff is usually state land or public parks. And then the tan colors, those are all lands that are currently under application for easements. And this is what I'd like to see in Utah. And just so you see, other states are doing this. This is Chester County, Pennsylvania. Not only states, but cities. Boulder, of course, has been very ambitious. Since 1967, they've protected more land than I think any other city has. And so everything you see in green is protected land. I think the green is well, let's see, I think I've got it better. There's the county map. Anything in light green is farms that are preserved. Dark green is more open space, recreational areas. Hamilton Township and other towns. You can see this is a fairly heavily developed city. The green spaces are easements. These are all identified as places that potentially could be placed in easement. And one more, this is Westboro, Connecticut. So I just want to show cities are involved in this as well. Everything in green is an easement. Everything in the red is spaces that are unprotected that are targeted. And even Seattle. And Seattle's sort of like the Wasatch Front. It's between mountains and water and heavily urbanized and lots of trees. And so the farms that they do have they are protecting at a very rapid pace. We have very little farmland here, and that should give us all the more reason to protect what we have. It's precious, that irrigated landscape, our orchards. Once houses are built there, or commercial developments, whatever it is, they're gone. They really are gone forever, and I think we need to think about the consequences of doing some of these things. So what should Provo do? These are just some suggestions. Save every west side farm we possibly can through easements. And we're not going to be able to save everything, but we should think about saving as many as we can. We need money to do that. Easements cost money for the most part, although farmers can donate easements. When they donate an easement, they get all kinds of tax incentive or tax benefits, which makes it possible for them to hold on to their farms in some cases. I think we should protect all the lakeshore's open spaces, everything south of the new highway and everything west of the west side connector, sorry, the northwest connector, whatever they're calling it now. These are precious spaces that they really don't ought not to be developed anyway because of their kind of wet and low. And I think we ought to protect those farms on both sides of the lower Provo River. And until we can do that, I think we ought to use zoning restrictions and other measures to try and keep these things undeveloped so we can do this the right way without infringing on anybody's property rights. So I'll close with that. If I can answer any questions, I'm happy to try.
Yeah, you did mention that with the New Jersey example, 64% of the cost of the easements was covered by the state. How amiable is our state to doing something similar?
Not very.
Okay.
Yeah, and I mean, there are a number of funds that are out there. They haven't been funded by the state as they could be, but I think it's a matter of political will. And I think what you see in this Envision survey is there's a change in attitudes, really just in the last 7 years among the population here to do something about this. And it does. It takes some political will. It's going to take some time to do that as well. And, there are things that can be done. There are transfer of development rights, which developers pay for, and we can always encourage farmers to donate if it's in their kind of personal and financial benefit.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Having been here for a couple of years, well, we moved down into our home in Lakewood, 1978, and I get to know a lot of people for various reasons, and I know a lot of farmers, and I know a number of them down in this protected area that we're looking at. They're talking about, we would love to sell our farm and get out of it. So by protecting, could we tell those people they can't sell their farm?
No, they can sell their farm. So
Right.
An easement is just a restriction on development rights. So what happens with a farmer is if they agree to an easement, they essentially get a cash payment right then. And they could use that. A lot of farmers will use this to invest in their farm and buy equipment. And then they can live on that farm, and easements can be done a lot of ways. They can actually say, well, I'd like to reserve 2 spaces to build houses for my kids. You can do that kind of thing. Or I'd like to reserve 1 chunk to sell at some point, and you can do that. But I want to save the rest forever, right? They put that easement on it, live on it. Let's say they retire, they want to sell the farm. They can sell the farm. They still own the farm. But whoever buys it knowing that they can't develop it. They can only farm on that land. So the benefit of that is twofold. One, it protects the farm, but it also means that if someone wants to farm, they don't have to compete with developers for the price of the farm because now it's only worth what it is as agricultural land.
Well, what's interesting to me is when we moved down there in '78, there were no homes south of us. People asked me where I live. I said, well, I live in Max Phillips or Hayfield because I knew the person that owned the property. As that developed, having the opportunity of being the neighborhood chair when we would hold meetings and something to be built, and people would come to protest that being built, that farm property. And sooner or later it got built, and then they got ready to build the next section. And so those that were at the meeting earlier, that they're saying, well, we don't want anything built south of us.
It's always not my backyard.
Well, I just tell them, had I have been successful in my effort, you guys wouldn't be at the meeting.
And that's true, and we're kind of all complicit in this, and that's why we want to point fingers and say, it's the developers that are bad, or the city council that's bad. Look, this is just the way we've been moving, and we'd like to see a change. And it's not an easy thing to change, but I think we're seeing kind of a change in the way people are thinking about this, and we're realizing there's only so much land left. And so it shouldn't be, I shouldn't be arguing that I want to save the west side because I don't want anybody living west of me. I want to save the land because there's other, better reasons to do
I would agree with that.
You talked about the easements and selling property, they have the right to sell. You said getting a chunk of ground. Are the prices that they're getting, are they based on agricultural land prices?
They are.
Or are they, because I know that developers will come in and they pay a lot more.
They do, right.
And so they have to, it's a sacrifice to put a property in an easement.
It can be, it just depends, and I
I'd
think
like
on
to
the
know
west side.
how we can do something where they're not sacrificing.
Right, yeah.
And what it, because I appreciate the people that are willing to sacrifice for Provo, and I love my kids very much, and I want to give them as much as I can when I pass on.
No, I agree.
And so I
agree with you there. There's not the same incentives when you put an easement on your property, right? And most of those farmers, that's their retirement, so it's not in their best interest to shortchange their retirement by not selling to a developer.
And that's the scary part for
Yeah.
me.
But all farmers are different, right?
And
It's
I
good to talk
appreciate
to them,
that.
right?
I would
And
love to meet
the
them.
reality is that many farmers, when they sell their land, 40% of it goes to estate taxes, right? If they do an easement, a lot of that goes away, and so in some ways they actually can save money by doing an
And
easement.
that's a great concept.
So
And that 40% depends on how you use it.
That's
Still,
right.
it's
That's
just
right.
there's a lot of ways. It's just
But I think there are a number of farmers out there that even if they could just break even, they would love to be able to preserve that
and
farm.
I am very grateful for those people that are willing to do that.
I actually talked to some farmers on Saturday at the farmer's market and asked them a couple of questions of whether they want to preserve some of their land or whether they were done and wanted to give up. And they said there was different perspectives on it. Some of them wanted to preserve some of it, maybe not all of it. But then I talked to them about the transfer of development rights. Did you look into the transfer of development?
I've been studying it, yes.
Okay.
And transferring those development rights, that may be a great tool. And I know that if I transfer my development rights, I'm taking a few things from my kids in the end, because I'm going to use that in my retirement. It depends. And all those things, they're a challenge. And I worry about, my biggest concern about development rights is that somebody's going to change their mind, and they're going to come back and say, really, this should be a house here.
These are pretty rock solid agreements.
And I agree with
They
that.
have a good track record.
Can I
Good.
ask a question about that then? Okay, so an idea that was presented to me is if they do a transfer of development rights, does that mean they can't subdivide the land into like 10-acre lots to do more specialized farming? The land would still be used as farmland.
Right, every easement is different, and so farmers can actually shape the easements to fit their needs. And some of them are written that way, that there are certain things they can do and certain things they can't, and they have to agree with that. And then, of course, they have to comply with it over the long term. But yeah, I've seen all kinds of different ways of approaching this. And so the beauty of the easements is they are really flexible. And in the end, if we can save a good chunk of the land, all of it, part of it, all of that's good, I think, for all of us in the long term.
Okay, that was a middle ground that I was thinking. That way they can sell their development rights, but then in the future, if their kids don't want a large farm, they can chunk it down to homestead farming, which I know there's a lot of interest in homestead farming here in Utah County.
Well, I know a few books. If you want me to send an email that has it, I mean, they give you all the details of what you can do with an easement. I was actually impressed with their flexibility.
Do we have any idea of what the cost would be in the area we're describing that you're thinking should be protected?
Right.
Do we have any sort of range of
Market analysis.
of saying, yeah, market analysis of saying, gee, to really preserve this area easement-wise, it would cost, I mean, do we?
It's going to
any
be
kind of
more
ballpark?
expensive out there in some places just because it's right up against current development. But I don't know. There's an equation that they use. They try and determine what the actual agricultural value is for that land.
But,
Is that the Greenbelt designation?
No, that's
Agriculture.
Because I know they can get, I was reading through the document and trying to piece it all together, but I know the Greenbelt gives them breaks on their property taxes, but does that values their land at agriculture, is that then valuation used in transfer development?
I'm not sure. But then again, anything like that makes agriculture more viable in the community is also a good thing because it gives farmers reasons to hang on and kind of takes a bit of agriculture.
In the interest of moving on, thank you for coming.
No, thanks for having us.
I'm sure you're going to have some more questions, And I think there's probably some interest in gathering some better information on, or some more succinct information on some of the toolkit items.
Sure.
So that when you start exploring the, whatever parameters you want to recommend to council in terms of the planning, that we can incorporate into a document. And so we may invite you back, but it will certainly follow up with some questions on stuff.
And I can just say that Envision document is really quite good and fairly comprehensive. It's written very helpful and timely.
And I believe you've all received that electronically, have you not?
So I have a couple of hard copies here.
And there's hard copies here too.
We got
so-
a week ago, didn't we?
Yeah.
Dawn, I think.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. The next presentation will be Public Works, and is that, start with you, Dave?
I'm going to start. Thank you.
Okay.
Are you combining both of them into one presentation then?
Thank you. You want me to give a copy of that?
I'm Dave Decker. I am with Provo City Public Works, and we have a number of staff members. I want to make sure that everybody knows the staff. We have Dave Graves here up front. He's the city engineer and division director over engineering. Greg Beckstrom is over against the wall. He's the public services division director. And Gary Calder is in the back. He has been with the city for just over a month, and he is our new water resources division director over water and wastewater. Also David Day, you probably know David. He is development review coordinator for Public Works, and we put a lot of information. We've been asked to cover transportation, all the infrastructure challenges on the west side. We have about 5 different major categories to cover in 20 minutes. And we've got about 22 slides to cover in 20 minutes, so we're going to go very, very quickly here. So I'm going to turn some time over to David Day first. He's going to cover transportation first. And one of the things that I wanted to point out, we're going to talk a little bit about roads, but we do have more transportation as far as trails and bikes and things like that. We're not going to spend much time at all today on it, but we do have some master plans. And if you want some more information, David could probably provide that in the future. So David, why don't you cover transportation?
Thank you, Dave.
Number you have reached is not charged.
Should we wait, Cliff, or?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Let's see if this is gonna work. It's frustrating.
We're using a Canadian phone?
It should work, pointing it that way. Maybe coming on this side. Or you can come up here. Oh, you know what? That cabinet has to be open to use it.
We're sorry.
It's up at the top. And do you have the little thing in it?
I'm sorry. Let's see if she has the.
I'm more intrigued by the camera up there.
He's not being able to hear back and forth.
I'm just. I just want to buy that cheap thing.
I did that. Just tell me what to do and I'll.
Gary can hit the arrow button for it.
All right, so what you're seeing up here is just our all of Provo City, our transportation master plan. The roads are highlighted. Arterials are red and collectors are blue. And that's about as far down as we get with our master planned roads. There's a lot of local roads in between those roads, but this is what the master plan just mainly deals with, higher volume roads. Can you go to the next one? So here's a zoom in on the area that we're talking about. Hopefully you can see the river right here and coming south, and then I-15 right here going west. And so the new road, you see that highlighted in red, that's an arterial, and that'll open this week. And then all of the roads connecting down to it, those are all projected connections. Our dotted lines they don't exactly have to go in exactly those locations. They're just dotted to be a placeholder. As development occurs, we expect them to build a road in that general vicinity. A couple roads that are connected right now, 1100 West and 5th West, are tied into this new Lakeview Parkway. And just for your information, Lakeview Parkway is the name of the new road that will go all the way up and tie into Orem, so it'll have one name the whole way. Next slide.
State Street. How far is the opening? When you guys open next week, how far?
And that name? will go with
The
State
opening will be just what you see there. It'll tie into the airport road right there, and so you'll be able to go on the airport road, and it'll go all the way to I-15, and you'll be able to drive on 5th West and 1100 West. So all of that in green will be open. There were some questions earlier in some of our committee meetings about what property there is south of the road. So I brought this slide in for you to look at. The purple color indicates private property ownership. Of course, the green is the road. The orange color is city-owned property. The hatched area right here is a wetland mitigation area. So we can't ever do anything with that property right there. This area out west that's hatched is a indirect mitigation area that has to stay in its current state forever. So we do have some easements over areas that have to stay as they are right now.
Is
The rest of
everything
this-
south of that undevelopable, or?
Is it,
It's all
where's the
state,
Well-
state land.
So the stuff that's private property, it's kind of up to the property owners, but we would
Below the
propose.
purple, below the purple, is that
State land.
state land then?
Yeah, the lake. Yeah, it's so some of these you'll see line a pretty good line, and that would indicate the state has settled with those property owners and have we call that what the meander line, where the lake goes along the edge of those properties, and the state claims the property up to that line. And so some of these have settled. There's a few of these, like if you look at these actually go like way out into the lake. So just for your information. But that's how it is. From a public works perspective, we would probably prefer, and you guys can chime in, that this stayed agricultural south of the road, just with all of the difficulties of bringing utilities down there. In light of the last presentation, Public Works doesn't really develop property. We respond with infrastructure needs, so we're not the ones destroying the farms. So don't throw rocks at us.
I think the best way to say it is the master plans for infrastructure, we have nothing planned south of that roadway.
Yeah. And as development occurs, we take infrastructure to the developments. So next slide, did you want to take this, Dave, or
Great.
do
Thank
you
you,
want
Dave.
this pointer?
I'm okay. I'll take it. So one of the topics that we wanted to make sure that the committee would recognize was the airport. The airport, I think, has a pretty significant or potentially significant impact on the west side. And you may know we've added some flights recently. We're up to about 20, 25 flights per week, commercial flights that go out of the airport. And my sense is that will continue to grow. The flights that are going, I think there's 4 destinations that we fly to. The flights run in the 90% full or above. They're it's a very good record for flights. And I think our carrier Allegiant recognizes it's a good potential market, and I only see good things happening in the future for the airport. But there are some challenges that will come because of that. This slide illustrates a potential new location for a terminal, a bigger terminal where, you know, multiple gates could be built for flights coming in and out. Right now, we only have room for 2 flights at the same time. If we had a delay on some days, we actually would not be able to get people in the terminal. So we've got some challenges at the airport. One of the things that I wanted to point out also on this, there's a zone around the airport, mostly on the east and the north side. It's called the APZ zone. It stands for Airport Protection Zone, and it's required. FAA requires us to have certain protection around the airport. And I asked Steve Gleason, who's the airport manager, what his preferred occupied, something to go into that APZ land, and he actually said agriculture is one of his the best things that we could put in the APZ zone. There's some other things, airport-related aviation industries, potentially a hotel, something like that, that would eventually be needed in that location for those kind of services. But you need to kind of, I would encourage the committee to think about some of those things, not only at the airport, but around the airport.
Can I ask, what's a required FAA buffer around an airport? Is it 200?
It depends. They vary depending on the traffic and the volume, size of the planes, things like that.
Okay.
So this has been identified, this is accepted right now by the FAA as adequate for the Provo Airport.
Okay.
Dave, the protected zone does not have to be fenced.
No.
So that's not a security issue.
It's not, yeah, the APZ zone is not a secured area. It's just simply mostly keeping certain things. A lot of it is height related and also high density. You know, airports don't like high density around the airport. So if there is an accident, if there's something that happens, you don't want a plane going into a residential area. And so that's kind of the thinking is they say here's the risk factor for that particular airport. Let's set that aside. But it doesn't have to be secured with a fence.
Airport number 2 in Salt Lake had the thing where they actually were okay with apartments more than they were with condos because they said condos complained. You know, homeowners will complain about the noise in that where renters won't as much. So
yeah, there are
and those are on edges of all of those areas.
There are some secondary issues relative to noise in the airport, but one thing at airport number 2 in Salt Lake, you'd recognize the big soccer complex that's up in West Jordan, like 25 soccer fields right in the runway area. Part of that is noise, but I actually think it's partly because of protection for the airlines. You know, if something has to land outside that runway, they've got some flexibility.
And there have been actually planes land in the soccer area by accident.
There have. That's why I point that out. It's designed there intentionally.
Yeah. Just so you know, we're going to be inviting the airport manager to come out, hopefully in 2 weeks, to do a presentation like this, so give us a broader view of the airport as well.
Let's move on, Gary. Thank you. So the next topic. Sorry, I apologize. Any other questions on the airport before I switch gears? Okay, let's move on to wastewater then. This is a map that we talked with the council about some time ago, probably 6 or 8 months ago. We were talking about some of the challenges with wastewater. This is our sewer system on the west side. And one of the biggest challenges is we have an existing 36-inch sewer line. It's the main trunk line out for the west side, and our treatment plant sits right here over by East Bay Boulevard near the Public Works offices. And this is the main feed for the west side to the treatment plant. We're getting close to capacity. It was identified as a potential issue on the west side in our master plan that was completed in 2012. And I'll show you some costs in just a second on it. But they indicated we've actually gone out and done some measurements, some flow. We've got some insertion meters that go into the sewer line so we can watch the flow during the day and the variations that happen on the sewer line. We probably have roughly 2,000 residential units available still in that sewer line, but once we exceed 2,000 units, we're going to need another sewer line, a parallel 36-inch line that has been put in the master plan. The green line that goes up Geneva Road is also a major project that was identified in the master plan. And I also would point out on this particular slide, we have several existing, these X's are pump stations. So Provo City, because of the nature, particularly on the west side, is very, very flat. A lot of cities, it's nice to have a gravity feed system. Provo doesn't have that luxury, and so we actually have to put pump stations in and lift the sewer up into these gravity lines. So this line right here is gravity fed, but all of these. And these are existing lift stations, pump stations, and we've indicated whether they're at or near capacity, and there's some future ones in there too. You can see that there's some additional infrastructure. Just so that you get some perspective, each one of those new lift stations, it's $1 million right now. $1.2 million is what we're spending out at the Ivory Development Broadview Shores for the lift station we're building right now, and the one out at the airport also.
How much do developers pay for that?
It depends. Right now, generally they pay impact fees, but if they were to come in, if there was a development that came in and said, I want to build right here, and they were in that area of that future lift station, right now we do not have that future lift station on a 5-year CIP for Provo City. So we would be telling that developer, we have no capacity for you. There's no way that we can serve that piece of ground that you're interested in developing. So if you want to move forward, you need to figure out how to pay for that lift station. And we might enter into some agreement with him to pay him back. But right now, if they're not in an area we can serve, that's really the answer that we did that.
Dave and I got a tough question here. We don't know, after our work meeting last week, we don't know what the state's going to do with this with water control.
You're jumping ahead of me just a little bit.
Okay, should I wait?
No, go ahead, Derek.
I just know as you look at this on the west side here, how many places do we actually have that we could put a sewer plant? Now, I'm not saying that we will put it there, but are there spots that you recognize, yeah, there's a potential here or here or here? Are there several, or are we pretty well tied to a certain area?
There's not several. There's probably 2 or 3 options, and one of those options is actually on the opposite side of Provo Bay. Let me make sure that the rest of the committee understands the challenge that you're kind of alluding to. A few weeks ago, we went to the council and brought the council up to date on an issue that has really thrown a curveball at Provo City Public Works. It's been kind of a difficult issue, and it started with the state Division of Water Quality, and you've probably heard quite a bit about the algae bloom that's happened on Utah Lake, and I'm going to try to give you kind of the shorter version of this issue, but. They've kind of made a big deal of this, and we've known that new regulations were coming. And in 2020, so about 4 years from now, there's a regulation that will come and hit every treatment plant and limit our phosphorus discharge to 1 milligram per liter. This summer, because of what was happening in Utah Lake, they started making a much more significant issue of a second step that is planned in the future. We don't know the date exactly, but that second regulation will limit phosphorus down to 0.1 milligrams per liter. It will 10 times lower the regulation. And that same report, the integrated report, also puts Provo Bay, which is just off the map here, puts Provo Bay on what is called an elevated impaired water body list. So Utah Lake, back in 2002, was placed on that impaired water body list. They placed Provo Bay separate and elevated above Utah Lake in this new report in 2 areas, pH and ammonia. And they tied those 2 chemicals, those 2 issues in Provo Bay, to algae blooms. So basically what they are telling us is in some point in the future, Utah Lake will go to 0.1, Provo Bay will probably go even less than 0.1, 0.05 or 0.01, some very, very low number. And the problem that we have, the concern that we have with that is our existing process at the treatment plant, there's going to be some point where we say our existing treatment plant cannot meet that future regulation. And there is not a reason to put any more money into our existing treatment plant. we'd rather put the money into a brand new treatment plant. Be that, and it probably would be called, I don't know if you know what a membrane treatment plant is. They're very sophisticated, very expensive, probably in the range of $200 to $250 million for Provo City alone. And we would, the issue that we would face, Gary alluded to it, is do we put that treatment plant at the existing site, or do we move that new treatment plant someplace out close to the airport? The airport is one of the more logical locations for the treatment plant. I talked a little bit about the APZ zone. You oftentimes see treatment plants near airports as you fly around the country. They're pretty common around airports. And that's one of the probably 2 sites on the north side of Provo Bay that we would look at for a future treatment plant. And it would likely discharge directly into Utah Lake instead of Provo Bay because of the unknown regulations that right now the state can't tell us where they're going to go with those regulations.
If a plant was to go out to the airport, would that allow you to do more of a gravity system rather than relying on the lift stations?
It would eliminate some of these lift stations. So you can imagine, instead of this line trying to go that direction, it would probably come down one of these 2 roads, and it would definitely eliminate a couple of pump stations, not all of them though. The Lakewood, there is a Lakewood lift station right there. It would not eliminate that lift station. So it would probably help us in that regards. So that's a very, very quick summary. So we have a real challenge, and we've met with the state a number of times over the last 2 or 3 months, trying to get a little bit better direction from the state. And I think they've been good to, they especially our last meeting, they finally kind of understood. They've given us so many unknowns in Provo Bay that we really can't, I don't feel like I can stand in front of the city council at this point and say, invest any more money in the current treatment plant, because we're not sure that it's a quality investment that may last more than 10 or 15 years. So that's a very quick summary of that issue. Any questions on that? Let's keep going here. This is just very quickly give you an example. That parallel 36-inch line, this is a summary of costs that we have given to the council right now. Again, this is kind of a question mark because of that wastewater issue. $9 million for that new parallel 36-inch line that was shown on the previous map. And that's how right now we plan to save for that. So that is one of the key elements of West Side development, is getting that in place, that line in place. Again, lots of questions that need to be answered before we made even that kind of an investment on the west side, whether that line should flow east or flow west. We're going to, any other questions on wastewater?
I'm going to suggest to the committee that on any of these presentations and any of these weeks, if you have questions, feel free to forward them to me, and we will go out to the various presenters we've had and ask for follow-up.
So we're going to shift gears again on, this is a map of our culinary water system. This is in a modeling program actually for our water system, and it shows the pressures. This is a little bit hard to read, but this is the water, culinary water pressure at build-out without any future improvements beyond 2 tanks that we have built recently. They're under construction right now, one on Columbia Lane, one in Slate Canyon. Those 2 new tanks will only serve the west side of Provo. They're designed, even though they sit on the east portion, even up on the east bench in the case of Slate Canyon, they have to be elevated about 150 feet to 200 feet before they start to serve somebody. So the railroad line that cuts through Provo City, if you can picture where that railroad line is, that is our new water zone. So that's the upper portion of the water zone on the west side, and everything west of that new railroad is in the water zone that those 2 new tanks will service. Those 2 tanks sit at the exact same elevation so that they will fill and work together to feed water on the west side. So that's a significant investment that the city has done recently for the west side. With those 2 new tanks in place, here's the pressure. So the green nodes are between 50 and 70 psi. And this model was run with a residential fire flow right out here by the airport. This is out, I don't know the address exactly, but it's out on Center Street. The reason we picked Center Street is it's a long dead-end line. And for water systems, that's not good. So that's kind of our weak spot right now, and that's why we picked that location for a fire flow.
Is 20,000 psi sufficient fire flow or insufficient fire flow?
So 20, so the pressure, there's two components to a fire flow. One is the gallons per minute. So for residential fire flow, the state sets a minimum 1,000 gallons, 1,000 gallons a minute at 20 psi, and you have to maintain 20 psi throughout your whole zone. So you can't have a fire going on and draw all the water away from everybody else, and nobody can have a drink of water. That's basically what they're saying. So
Down there at the end of Center Street, though, with this model, there is sufficient fire flow.
there is.
Okay.
This is for residential development.
Okay.
If you were to put a commercial down there, they do not have that fire flow. So that
Right now.
Right now.
Yeah.
So the development that's happening at the airport, we're having to put a loop system in with Duncan Aviation. I don't know if you've heard about that development, but we're putting in a loop off of 3150 up to Center Street, and we are going to loop that part of the system so that they have more fire flow in that area.
Dave, I know that with our water system, we don't have a secondary system, so we're dealing with the culinary. This is all we're dealing with. Is there any plans? Should we be able to preserve some agriculture to put in how do we deal with water issues for agriculture? Because I know that ground is getting drier and drier every year, it seems like. And is there potential somewhere to getting water to some of these areas should we desire to save this ground for agriculture?
Yes, there is, and there's a couple of options that we have. One thing that I would point out is part of the reason that Provo, at least in my opinion, part of the reason that Provo doesn't have a secondary water system is the water rights that the city has. They are of such high quality that we would be using the exact same water that we put in our culinary system for a secondary system. And the only thing that we do to our water is treat it with chlorine. And it's very, very high quality. And the infrastructure cost to put in pipe throughout the whole city for a secondary doesn't make sense if you're going to put the exact same water into that pipe. So Provo has not ever done secondary. Cities, like Lehigh and Eagle Mountain and places that are developing, where they're getting irrigation water shares, it's very low quality, you can't drink it. So it does make some sense for those cities. It's never made sense, and I would not anticipate ever recommending a change in that policy for Provo. I will say one other thing about a source of secondary water, and I just covered it with our wastewater treatment plant. If we're going to treat our discharge to that point, there is some discussion that needs to happen about reuse of that water.
So that could be a potential source for agricultural ground without wasting or using our culinary.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Our treatment plant right now runs 14 million gallons a day through that treatment plant. That's a lot of water. 42 million gallons of water a day. Or excuse me, 42 million gallons of water. No, sorry, that's a different, I apologize, that's a different number. We run 14 million gallons a day through our treatment plant. And again, we're going to treat that water. It's going to be very high quality water. We need to talk about reuse of that water.
Thank you.
Any other questions on that issue, Gary? So these are the planned improvements out on the west side, and just a couple of things that I will note on this. There's been some discussion about commercial development out on the west, I still call it the West Side Connector near I-15 and also up on Geneva Road at 2000 North. I had some fire flows run at 2,000 gallons a minute. With these improvements right here, we have no issue. Right now, technically, we actually don't have an issue. The fire flow down here on the West Side Connector at 2,000 gallons a minute, it dropped to 30 PSI, which is getting close to the state regulations, but technically we still meet the regulations. So let's keep going. Last item on the culinary water system, the one thing that I want to point out is these crossings right here on I-15. That's kind of, again, those are the minimum. That's where our water system's kind of the weakest because we don't have that interconnection, that redundancy. But it's still a very, very good system. And again, that railroad line, here's the railroad. That's the boundary of the new water zone. You can see it right there. Other than that, on this slide, it's a little bit busy. We identify some 6 and 4-inch lines in red that probably ought to be replaced with larger lines. Right now, as far as fire flow, we don't have an issue, so that's more of a replacement as they age. We would replace those lines with larger lines. Let's keep going, Gary. With stormwater, there's a number of issues that the committee needs to answer. We'll talk a little bit about flooding history. Back in the 80s, I think everybody that went through 83, 84 time frame knows that Utah Lake came up quite far into Provo. And we'll show you a map where it actually came to. But some of the issues that we have are related to flooding, also infrastructure. Let's keep going, Gary. So our existing infrastructure is outlined on this map in purple, and you can see in this area that's not developed, we have very, very little infrastructure, and the challenge that we have particularly is with the culverts that go under the new West Side Connector. They're anywhere from a half a mile to a mile away from near existing development. So what these two maps, I hope what you're starting to see is infrastructure as far as water is available right here, but as far as wastewater and stormwater, they've got to run a half a mile worth of infrastructure to find a storm drain or to find a sewer line. So Public Works is kind of feeling this competing nature of our infrastructure. Some of them want to build really close to our existing development. Some of them want to build way down low next to the West Side Connector because they've got a storm drain crossing right there, and they don't want to run that. Yet then they have to run a half a mile worth of water line to it. So it's kind of two different issues going on there. This map is identifying a couple of different things. I want to point out there are some lift stations also in our stormwater system. It's a little bit unusual for a municipality, and there may be some concerns about those lift stations, especially in emergency conditions. We have thought a little bit in Public Works about those lift stations in another one right there, in emergency situations, but we probably need to be better prepared for a potential emergency. The next map, this is just a zoomed in version of the previous with a little bit less information on it. This contour line right here is the illustration of where what they call the compromise level.
That's the flood elevation.
Flood elevation. 4495 is the flood elevation. And right now in our ordinances, our city code, it requires homes to develop on the west side, the finished floor has to be 1 foot above that contour. So the challenge that we have on stormwater and development that's below that, but still north of West Side Connector, the Lakeview Parkway, is are we going to require those homes to build that 1 foot higher than the contour? In some cases, it could be 2, 3, 4 feet of additional fill that's brought in. And we've already heard some feedback, negative feedback about how that kind of pushes the homes up in the air. But there's a concern from Public Works standpoint, if we have another year of 83, 84 floods, what does that do potentially on the west side? I do have to tell you, and I know this is being recorded, and nobody tell the Corps of Engineers, but the new road, the Lakeview Parkway, Public Works would definitely use that as a method to keep the lake out. We were not allowed to build that as a dike, but I will tell you right now is if I'm here as Public Works Director, we will definitely use that in every way that we can to keep the lake out of Provo City. So,
Do you mean like filling it with dirt on top?
I don't know that that would be required. This road is 8 to 10 feet higher than the existing ground.
The 2 feet above the flood elevation.
There's your
Above
answer.
that jagged line?
Yes.
2 feet.
The issue that we're going to have, Cliff, is these culverts right here.
Oh, yeah.
The lake will come up through the culverts, and we would have to block those culverts. And because the road's not designed as a dike, it's kind of an unknown of how much water we would see coming through the roadway or underneath the roadway. So we'd have to put pump stations on the north side of the road, pump any excess water over the top of the roadway and back into the lake.
Dave, I know back in 83 and 84, they used State Street as a river and to get for water issues, and they tell me now that we would not have that same issue because of improvements that we have made. Is this line here still viable? Is it still something that is viable that we really need to consider, or have improvements made that can actually mitigate some of that there?
I've heard the same comments. I actually heard Stan Roberts, who interestingly enough is the Provo River Water Commissioner. He said, had things been operated in 83, 84 the way they are today, water would have been stored and protected even upstream in Jordanelle and Deer Creek. Jordanelle wasn't there in 83, 84. So he feels like there's a lot more protection. The pumps at Great Salt Lake, Greg's probably got some more information on this. I don't know that I can really put a risk factor on that, but it still certainly is a potential issue in my mind. Greg, do you want to add anything?
I think most of the improvements in terms of the reservoirs and Utah Lake would probably minimize the flows that went through the community in Provo River, where I think we're better off protected in terms of flooding along the river. In terms of the lake elevation, the numbers are so grand in terms of the potential runoff that the water coming into the water going out only affects over a long period of time. FEMA is doing their new analysis, and basically the flood elevation for the lake, reflecting all the improvements that have been made in the last couple of decades, is not changing. So I think in terms of protection from Utah Lake flooding, things have not changed significantly.
As far as flood insurance, this is one of the issues that policy that I brought up as far as building the homes up higher. Flood insurance is one of the issues that homeowners will face on the west side in Provo, and so that policy will potentially affect the premium that homeowners are having to pay. Any other questions on stormwater?
You had the other options, I guess, because this always comes up when people fill, the ground in and do their base floor elevation above that. Then does that absolve them from the flood insurance and the other issues? And is that a solution for some people?
It's a protective measure that they take into the flood insurance question. Greg, can you shed a little more light on that?
Yeah, the flood insurance is probably another half hour to 45-minute discussion in terms of that. But our standard, which is not driven by the flood insurance requirement, does keep them in a situation where they are probably going to pay lower insurance rates as a result of having their homes developed at that higher elevation that's protected from lake flooding.
Last one here. So I think I pointed out most of these issues. Our drainage, storm drains tend to be a long distance, so we're lacking a lot of infrastructure needs on the west side. We have some existing deficiencies in some of the areas, and trying to accommodate both future and existing problems. It's probably one of the weakest areas on the west side as far as storm drain improvements. I think you're sensing, particularly the water, I would say, is the strongest utility on the west side. Wastewater is probably next in line, and stormwater is probably the furthest behind. So I think that's the way I would put them in as far as categories. I think we tried to cover most of this. The easements. I guess the one thing that I'll point out on the legal challenges on the easements, those roadways that were shown, David talked about those future connections. Those are probably the areas where storm drains are going to come down and cross the west side connector, the Lakeview Parkway. The problem that the city has is if development wants to build up next to existing development, we don't own the right of way or have an easement to put in a storm drain down to that west side connector. So developers are having to go out and get easements for the city, and they have a lot of challenges. And some of those developers come out and say, city, you ought to be out there getting those easements for us. Again, long debate on that, but right now that's not the stance that we've taken in Public Works. We're not out there buying those easements in advance. We talked, I think, about the rest of them. One other thing that I just wanted to mention to the committee, this is a map of the Provo River Delta Restoration Project. You may have heard about this project. So this is just north of the Provo River, north of Center Street, and immediately adjacent to Utah Lake. And this is just kind of a rough concept plan of what they're planning to do. I think they're getting close to starting construction on this, Greg.
They're in the process of property acquisition and design. They're probably a year away from starting actual construction.
So, and a lot of this relates to the June Sucker and trying to put a habitat together. Part of the reason I just pointed this out is I want to make sure that you're aware of this happening. And this would preserve open space. This is definitely an area that would not be developed in the future, preservation. We are concerned in Public Works about the impact potentially on the airport. Wetlands may likely attract birds, and birds and planes don't interact very well.
Not conducive to longevity.
Yeah.
And the birds or the planes.
Birds or
the
both. Bad deal for both of them, I think. Anyway, so we are concerned. We've talked to the Delta Restoration people. We do have a plan, but it is a concern. It remains a concern for Public Works. And so anyway, I think that's enough said on that, unless there's any other questions.
So could you go back to that last slide? So somewhere over here, isn't the west side, the Lakeview Parkway is going to come up through here too?
Yeah,
you can
it's
see it
actually
really faint.
kind of see these faint lines up through
Right
here.
there, okay. And that's part of an annexation area, right?
Right.
Okay.
So it runs right on the east side of the Delta Restoration Project.
Okay.
So when they talked about preserving the agriculture, the open space west of that, a large portion of it's already set aside for this restoration project.
Any questions?
Will all these slides be available on the minutes?
Yes, we will get copies of the slides, and then we'll actually email it all out to you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Sounds like we covered.
Dave Harding has a question. Go ahead, Dave.
Go ahead.
Okay. So we have been told that the EIB and the long-range plans for utilities are based on a 4 unit per acre density for the area.
Right.
We've also seen just right now that we have, we'll have to improve the infrastructure just to develop up to those 4 acres or 4 units per acre. So how much of the infrastructure that would be needed to get to the 4 units per acre is already in, and how much of it is still on paper?
Well, the maps, and Dave, you weren't able to see the maps. I think particularly on the water system, what we were illustrating with new projects that needed to be built, that master plan and what you saw there was based on 4 units per acre. So if that density on the west side significantly changed, whether it's increased or decreased, those projects would follow, at least in part, not wholly. You have to understand, if we have 10 units on some portion of the west side, you still have to get 1,000 gallons a minute of fire flow there. And if you turn around and turn the density to 2 units on that same piece of land, you still have to get 1,000 gallons a minute there. So that part of the infrastructure doesn't really change significantly. So you need to understand that density and infrastructure demand doesn't correlate, dollar for dollar.
There is some scalability, but not
exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. And by the way, I could see those maps. Karen was able to switch it, and someone was able to switch it over, so I was looking at those maps.
So that even the wastewater, the master plan anticipates 4 units per the acre. That's right now, that was what was communicated. I think it was in 2011 or 2010 when those master plans were started. And that's what the general plan recommended on the west side was 4 units per acre. So pretty much everything that you see today is based on 4 units per acre average across the west side.
Right. Okay, and so if the acres were made, instead of, okay, this area should be 2, this area should be 6. And the long-range plans would need to be updated, but we wouldn't necessarily be throwing away infrastructure that's already been put into place.
No. And again, part of the reason I answer that question the way I do is because changes in density don't necessarily drive down your infrastructure costs. In some cases they would, like for stormwater, if you had low impact development, it was lots of green space, you're going to definitely decrease the amount of stormwater that you generate. So it does make a difference in the stormwater category. Wastewater, it's probably a bigger impact. Culinary water, not as big an impact.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you. Thank you very much for
Thank you, Dave. Thanks
the
for
invitation.
all of you. Help us understand better. That is pretty much our presenters for today, and I think it's time for us to end the meeting anyway. We'd like to suggest we have a meeting in 2 weeks, same time, same place. Parks and Rec will present economic development in the airport in its presentation on the parks. So we'll just plan that, you'll receive an agenda for that. And then after that, there's a suggestion that maybe we take a field trip out to some of these areas. Just take a tour out there, be on site so we can understand it a little better.
The challenge is at this time of day, it might be dark.
That's true.
And you're all invited if you'd like. There's a
celebration.
celebration tomorrow afternoon,
5 to 7,
5 to 7.
1100 West and 1560 South, and then the ribbon cutting the following day at 2:30 at same location.
So we can't drive out on the road to get there, we have to come down
Right,
Center Street.
until the ribbon cutting, and then you can drive home on the road.
Don, did you have, what's the
West
the
side,
opening of the west side,
or the Lakeview Parkway,
Will you say those times one more time?
5 to 7.
5 to 7
Tomorrow.
tomorrow,
And then-
2:30 for the ribbon cutting.
On Thursday or on Wednesday?
Again, if you want a hard copy of the agriculture toolkit, it's here. Also some Envision Utah documents. It's all there for you.
If there's no other comments or questions,
I've got one comment.
Dave?
I'd like to thank Mr. Manager for conducting the meeting, and would like to invite any community members or any of the public, if you have suggestions on things like field trips that you'd like us to do, or a certain aspect that you'd like us to address, bring people in to do presentations, please just email Cliff, and we will work those in.
Very good, thank you. Look for motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
The environment.
Who was the second?
Gary and Terry.
Okay.
And all in favor? Any opposed? Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Where?